The more that I talk publicly about burnout, the more that I hear people have either had it or are starting to understand that that was probably what was going on. We deal with such a huge range of things. It's very difficult to not be worried at times that you've missed something. We're all learning all the time. We're all upskilling all the time. We never really feel like we know enough. Do we put out the right job specs? Do we put out the right titles? Are we looking for the wrong things? Are we putting people off because perhaps we're asking for too many things in security? I just wonder if we can find a better way to attract talent.
Hi, I'm Guy Pojarny, CEO and co-founder of Snyk, and you're listening to The Secure Developer, a podcast about security for developers, covering security tools and practices you can and should adopt into your development workflow. It is a part of the Secure Developer community. Check out thesecuredeveloper.com for great talks and content about developer security and to ask questions and share your knowledge. The Secure Developer is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Secure Developer. Today we have a great guest with us, Stu Hurst from Just Eat. Welcome to the show, Stu. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for having me.
So, Stu, we're going to dig into a whole bunch of cloud security things and sort of understand security across different companies. And you've had quite a journey there. But before I dig in, tell us a little bit about yourself, like who you are, what you do, and maybe how you got into security in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm with Just Eat at the moment, which is an awesome food delivery and ordering company in the UK and around the world. So I'm heading up the cloud security team there, joined back in June. But my security career started in about 2011, where I'd actually been a mainframe developer for years before that, for my sins. And then I took a year out and I moved to a company called The Trainline, sort of super cool, agile internet business. And I was doing mainly third line support, Windows Server, incident response, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And their security person left, and I was asked to pick up fundamentally PCI compliance, which I didn't really know very much about. I didn't know a huge amount about security, went on some courses, and saw them through PCI compliance for a couple of years. So I suppose that was my baptism of fire into security. I really didn't know very much about it for that period of time, and it was very compliance driven. I hadn't really got into some of the other aspects of security. And then I suppose I got my big break at Skyscanner. I moved out of London and back to Edinburgh, where I'm from, for that role at the end of 2014, to kind of build a team there, starting with a very small team, only 2 or 3 of us. And they were an incredible company. I talk a lot on podcasts about my experience there and what we did and the environment and how it allowed me to really just learn everything about security and really get involved in every facet of security, from AppSec, SecOps, yep. you name it. I kind of I did a bit of everything, and a really open culture where you were given the opportunity to experiment and learn and fail and just do what you thought was the right thing to do, which I guess when I joined, I didn't really know. And then I've had a couple of moves since then. I did some time at Capital One in their UK cyber leadership. I wanted to see what cybersecurity done at a larger level was like, and that gave me a great insight to that. Then did a year at Photobox and Moonpig. Interesting time there, a very interesting environment to try and get things done. And then I came to Just Eat. I know Kevin, the CISO, reasonably well, and it just aligned well for the kind of thing that I was looking for. It was kind of Photobox where I morphed into cloud security. I didn't join Photobox to do cloud security. I just got into the role that I was doing there and realized that it needed more focus. So kind of self-appointed myself to drive that. Yeah. And then that's kind of what my role has become at Just Eat. So leading the team here and building a team to address everything that we do in cloud.
Cool. Well, and we're going to dig into that a fair bit here and what cloud security encompasses, right? And then talk a bit about the hot topics there. So it's quite a journey, and different companies, you sort of have, maybe you kind of mentioned the openness of Skyscanner, maybe a little bit different in Photobox. You mentioned, sort of some small, some bigger companies like Capital One. Is there any pattern that sort of emerges? Like when you look at the approach to security, are there sort of key, can you look at whatever that sort of, 5-ish or so companies and security groups and say, well, I can kind of see these 2 or 3 camps in how they even approach security, where it sits in the org?
Yeah, actually, despite the fact that I've been at mainly e-commerce companies or internet tech companies, there are reasonable differences in how teams are structured, what they report into, size of teams, budgets. Sometimes the nature of the work has been reasonably similar. I mean, we're all fundamentally addressing very similar risks in the internet world. Capital One gave me a really good insight into how security is done at such a massive level. I mean, Capital One in the States is a big team. I think there's over 500 engineers there, or there was when I was there. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
I was really lucky to be able to see, albeit for a fairly short period of time, just how they did security there. Big budgets, big team in the UK of over 40 people. There's challenges in all of those roles, and for different reasons. Sometimes environments are easier to get things done, perhaps.
Yeah.
I found Skyscanner, and just now I find it incredibly easy to drive the work that I want to drive. It's very agile, very culturally open. Capital One was probably a little bit more difficult. It's regulated. There's compliance. There are things to consider. Because it's such a bigger team and a bigger animal, there's perhaps more process compared to what you might get in smaller organizations. So it has been different for each role. I think the one thing that I take from all of them is I've learned a huge amount in all of those roles, whether it's went well or not so well. I've certainly upskilled in a huge amount of areas, and not just security, in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
So it's been a really interesting journey.
So specifically, like, let's maybe dig about like this comment on like driving change, or sort of driving the behavior that you're sort of looking, or getting things you're trying to get done. So how is that different? For instance, like, what are the steps if you want to influence developers? Or can you give us some examples on, like, maybe the sort of the Justit or Skyscanner type scenario, and how would a project look like, and how would that differ, maybe like a somewhat similar risk tackling in a Capital One or a Photobox?
I mean, we're very agile. Skyscanner and Just Eat. In fact, all of those organizations that I've worked for are agile. Capital One was very agile for a financial organization, and mainly cloud-based. So incredible for what is essentially a bank to be nearly cloud-first, completely across their organization. I think we have an agility within somewhere like Just Eat, where we work in 2-week sprints. We're very, very closely aligned to engineering and to developers. We push out change in the same way that an engineering team would push out change, in the same pipelines, and we're custodians of those changes. So things don't necessarily go through more formal change processes, or it's not that there's a change board a week later looking at something about to go into prod. I mean, we just push out to prod 100 times a day across the organization, depending what day it is. So there's a real ability for security to move at the same pace as the rest of engineering. Our teams at Just Eat move things along very, very quickly. So we're very similar.
So it's just about speed, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that always comes with risk, right? That you do things at pace, and that means that you have to try and put either guardrails in place, or the right kind of alerting, or checks and balances in your pipelines and your processes to try and capture those things. I've found when I interview people from different types of industry that they tend to find that quite crazy. That there aren't necessarily whole teams of people reviewing changes and waiting and getting senior buy-in, or whatever it might be. It's very, very autonomous.
Yeah.
And that's why these organizations are successful, because they do things at speed. We release product at speed. We test things quickly. And that comes with an element of, and I talk a hell of a lot about failing and failing fast. And I know that that's a bit of a buzz term, but that's essentially what we do. We learn from mistakes very quickly, and that's how we drive all our kind of automation and agility.
Yeah, and you feel like you're basically embracing that same approach within the security organization as well. So like failing fast is oftentimes, well liked, and kind of a good concept, and really scaring in security. It's like, what do you mean fail fast?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, if I get breached every now and then, that's okay. Like, that doesn't really sound all that exciting. You feel like the approach of failing fast in those kind of more agile settings, today or in Skyscanner is better embraced. Like, how does that come to the forefront?
You're right. We don't have the same ability to fail at certain levels as other parts of the business, but we still have the same principles. It is still about pace and agility and how quickly we can drive change and get things done. Much of what we do in security is still code based, so we're still pushing out code the same as an engineering team would do. I think security is definitely aligning more with the DevOps engineering side. It doesn't feel like it's two completely separate units anymore, which, when I think back to my Trainline days, it probably was. Throwing pieces of work over the fence to get them done by engineering teams, or fixes applied. I think those worlds are combining far better, certainly in the worlds I work in.
Do you feel like there was an impact to where in the org? Like, where was security reporting to in these different organizations? And do you feel like that played a role or somehow correlated to how the organization behaved?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a maturity because I keep up to date with what's happening in those companies that I've worked for. I still have friends at the companies that I've worked for, and we hook up occasionally, and it's easy to find out what's going on. And I think certainly when I joined Skyscanner, so I reported into a director of engineering who reported into, I believe, another director, then the CTO, then the CEO. So there was 4 or 5 steps away from the top there. It certainly wasn't board level role or exec level kind of role. It was far more mid-level engineering, which was
But it is within engineering, like it wasn't separate.
yeah. And then something like Capital One, that kind of reporting line was the heads of which is what I came in to do, and then a UK CISO and the American CISO. So you're very close to the senior levels of very big businesses there. Just Eat has a similar setup where we have a CISO, Kevin, who's my boss, and then he reports into the CIO and the board effectively. So it's very visible at these companies, even further down the chain. Now I know the bigger the organization, the more difficult it is to see some of those things, but I've seen some of those organizations I've worked at start to elevate security either by bringing in CISOs or higher level security people
Yep.
to get that visibility further up the chain.
There's an interesting conflict, or like this trade-off between having the security organization be a part of the engineering org, which might not give them as much top level of visibility because it's a part of the engineering, like it doesn't maybe shine as its own entity as much, but is more embedded in engineering and its ability to influence, versus like having a CISO org that sort of reports into the board or into the CEO, and that has more visibility, but it's potentially more distant from engineering. Like, have you felt any of that, or like do you feel like there's a better or worse choice on those fronts?
Certainly, the roles I've been in from Skyscanner onwards have been very heavily aligned with engineering, but I don't think there's a right or wrong way to go about building teams or structuring teams. It works differently depending on the different types of organization. For instance, you might have a risk and compliance team might more naturally fit under a legal pillar, perhaps, and then the more technical aspects of security fit within engineering.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends on the organization and how easy it is to structure those things. With CISOs sitting at board level, fundamentally, sometimes it doesn't really matter what happens underneath there or how it's structured underneath a CISO. It's all how it filters up.
Yeah, as long as alignment works well. Cool. Well, so let's kind of move off the journey and into the destination and maybe dig a moment into sort of Just Eat and how things work, like how you structure the team in Just Eat. And we're going to get to cloud security shortly after. So, what is the structure of the team right now at Just Eat? Like, you run cloud security. What's the bigger picture?
Yeah, so Kevin Fielder, who's our CISO, has built an awesome team which is across numerous markets actually. So we have a company that we acquired in Canada called Skip the Dishes, and they're very much part of our global security team. And when we talk about the structure of the wider security team, we have AppSec, so your sort of standard pipeline code application security team. We have a SecOps team, so dealing with alerting, incident response, logging, all the natural things a SecOps team would deal with. And then I've come in to head up the cloud security team, which is fairly new compared to some of the other teams, which we're building out at the moment. And then we've got a couple of other people who are driving things like awareness and training, and then some of the more risk and compliance related activities. So 3 traditional or more traditional teams, if you like, and then some people dealing with some of those more ad hoc or niche aspects of security.
And what's the difference? So, like, cloud security is interesting and is new, and oftentimes, talking to different organizations has some gray area between that and AppSec. Given the kind of amount of cloud activity that is a part of the app, if you will, on it. Like, how do you delineate between those two groups?
Yeah, again, tricky because we deal with the infrastructure side, so our accounts and environments within cloud, and we use all 3 of the main cloud providers for different reasons. But of course, engineering and AppSec are dealing with applications within those environments. So they're running on EC2 instances or whatever it is in the individual cloud providers. So we've probably got less input to how the applications are running. We're more concerned with how those environments and infrastructures are protected. But of course, we do align with AppSec on various kind of pieces of work. It's interesting. Just Eat's a company where, regardless of the team you're in security, we're very cross-collaborative in the work that we do, and much of the project work, if that's what you want to call it, has input to lots of those things. So it's not completely separate for a lot of the major pieces of work.
Understood, and I think very powerful, right, to sort of be aligned and be able to collaborate across the teams, because these gray areas, these Venn diagrams are all over the place, like they always are. It's kind of no real way to avoid it. The sort of the formal ownership sounds kind of goes onto that sort of infrastructure versus workload. Is it like you'll secure Kubernetes and the cloud environment, but the team will secure containers? Actually, like containers are ones that are especially interesting to me because they're like firmly in this twilight zone between infrastructure and app. It's like, where do they fall in this equation?
And that's an interesting question, where at the moment they would fall within cloud security. Sometimes we don't have the most defined either job roles or job specs, and it can be, I think that's a good thing, actually, because when people come in, they get to cross-skill in all sorts of areas. So some things that might naturally fit with AppSec in other worlds maybe don't fit here. For instance, our SecOps team deals with things like WAF and DDoS, and maybe some of those things might fit in an AppSec team somewhere else, because there's more of a need to have that skill set there to build those things and support those things. So and it shifts as we develop and as we mature. Sometimes tooling goes to another team to support because it fits more naturally with them at a point in time. It's very fluid, really. Containers is an interesting one. We have different environments split between sort of Canada and Just Eat, and different architectures and tech stacks there of varying maturities, which makes it certainly interesting.
And is it always that container security still fits under the CloudSec team versus AppSec, or is it sometimes, like, what do you think is right? Like, is the trajectory different, or is that kind of, you think, the place for it to land?
Good question. I think it depends on the capabilities of your teams. Is there a natural fit for something like containerization? Not sure. I mean, I would argue that it would be in the cloud security world, because that's what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, AppSec or engineering is dealing with the actual building of stuff, using containers.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting topic, one that I don't think there's a right answer to that, because I think it just depends where you work as to who would potentially support those things.
So let's indeed talk skill sets a little bit, right? So you've got the teams. Let's kind of drill down into CloudSec and AppSec, because I think they're kind of closer to our audience's world. So in those two teams, what would you say are the primary skill set, and has that changed over the years?
I mean, we're a tech organization, so we're heavily focused on tech skill sets. We look for people who can code at any level and regardless of job role. So AppSec is quite heavy when it comes to looking for people who have scripting and coding knowledge, and CloudSec is no different. We use Terraform and CloudFormation and Ansible, and we need people who are comfortable with it, with a certain level of scripting. So there's quite a crossover there. I think the cloud security world is, and I've just been hiring for roles, and it's been a very interesting experience. What we did was, I separated out two roles. We lost, unfortunately, two senior people who were very good. And what I did was I separated those two job specs into a junior role and a senior role. And we had over probably 20 times the applications for the junior role than the senior one. Now, when I looked and reviewed all of the junior applications, a reasonable percentage of those, you could argue that they were senior people. Perhaps not explicitly in cloud security, but as a network engineer or somebody looking to transition. So it's really got me thinking whether, as companies, do we put out the right job specs? Do we put out the right job titles? Are we looking for the wrong things? Are we putting people off applying for roles because perhaps we're asking for too many things in security? And cloud's been a really interesting one. I am by no means a super cloud expert compared to other people in the industry, and it's been a real learning curve for me. But I just wonder if we can find a better way to attract talent. So putting out a junior role, even though we're bringing in people with reasonably senior skill sets, it's been really interesting.
Yeah, sort of junior to security, but senior to, like, as a professional. Like.
Yeah, or We actually brought in somebody recently from ASOS, the fashion retailer, and he was a platform engineer who had been dealing with some security
Hmm.
tasks or projects within that company, and but wasn't a traditional security person, hadn't had
Yeah,
years of experience in a security team, but had been a platform engineer, which is great. That was the
yeah,
kind of skill set that we were looking for, and he's come in and it's just doing brilliantly, and that crossover has been great. So we're open to looking for people of any skill set, to be honest. And in cloud security, it's very niche. So we're seeing a lot of more traditional network engineers, if you like, dealing with on-prem and
hmm,
things like, more traditional firewall applications, then wanting to move into the cloud. And it's almost a subset of the security industry, which is niche anyway, compared to a lot of engineering and tech, and then even more so in cloud. So I don't actually expect people to have super amounts of knowledge on cloud security, because to be
right.
honest, we're all sort of feeling our way through it and making it up as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. But you kind of get, if you're able to train people up, then you can take people that have security but don't know cloud, or people that know cloud but don't know security,
Absolutely.
and you
Yeah.
can bring them in, and everybody's happy. You get
Yeah.
to train them up, and you might not quite pay an arm and a leg for them at day one, as you might need to for someone, one of those 7 people that can actually state, long experience
Yeah.
with cloud security itself.
Yeah. And I suppose that journey is interesting, not just because of the recruitment side, but when we're trying to embed cloud security in these kind of organizations. I mean, I fully don't expect engineering teams to really understand those environments and how to secure them. And we're on a real path to help them with that, because it is very niche still,
Hmm.
and it takes a huge amount of knowledge to understand how to build securely in the cloud. I think what we need to get to is like anything within security, where we've just baked it in anyway, so that people don't have to worry about it, or go back and retrospectively fix things. But again, it takes a while to get to that point.
Yeah, well, it's and I do think that it overlaps. Oftentimes or sort of touches this change within the app. So increasingly, you need those people to also understand the app or the workloads that are running, and what they entail.
Yeah, yeah,
So maybe let's shift gears. We talked a lot org. Let's dig into some tech. So more meta, like cloud security. It's running right now. You're looking at. We're talking about understanding or not understanding cloud security. What would you say are like the core concerns right now, right? If you were to enumerate a top 3 or a top 5 cloud security concerns or risks, what would those be?
yeah. But what I've done since I've joined Just Eat is develop a bit of a risk framework, and we know that risk is not particularly sexy as a as a
Yeah.
terminology. Apologies for any risk people listening, but sometimes it's hard to articulate that to teams and why it should be important. I think, like anything in the industry, it's always interesting to see some of the hacks that are happening to other companies. I don't really want to name any particular companies. We're seeing the same kind of thing across some of those companies. At the moment, it's public S3 buckets with data in them. Providers like Amazon are working quite hard to try and make that more difficult, but it's still fundamentally happening. So cloud I think, is no different than the rest of the business. To me, it's all about the protection of data. We tend to use cloud to run applications, but also to store or use for our apps huge amounts of data. So
Hmm.
that's the thing that's valuable from an attacker point of view or an insider point of view. So that hasn't really changed over the years, I don't think.
So drilling into that one, which I agree is kind of a top concern, what's sort of the right solution for that in your mind? I mean, what's the set of sort of security controls, and to be used by whom to try and kind of rein in this risk?
I mean, I think there's numerous ways you can approach that. Data's it's need to know basis, as with anything. Least privilege, that can be more difficult to do in certain types of organization where people have lots of access or lots of ability to see things. A lot of the work that I've been doing over the last year or two in a few organizations has been around just not just visibility of the environments that we have, but alerting, making sure all the logging's in place, that should anything happen or should we be concerned that something's happening, we can go and see, and we can see some of the things that are happening. Alerting on things like somebody making a bucket public, for instance. If we build real-time alerting for that, at least we can see that that's happened. Maybe go and have a conversation with somebody to ask why that has happened. But I think we're very much moving into the whole compliance as code world, within cloud, where make it very, very difficult for mistakes to happen. Have those sort of tight guardrails where anything that then happens, it's either a mistake or something that slips through the net, is a real anomaly, and then you have the alerting to find out when that happens. The reality is, it's very difficult to do that quickly, because what I found in numerous organizations is people have been using the cloud for a long time, or they've shifted into the cloud, they have lots of accounts, they have huge amounts of applications running, lots of data. Then they decide that they need to do something about securing it, and you firefight a lot, and you plug lots of gaps before you can then go and do the sort of cooler stuff, the automation and the driving the real engineering change to make sure those things don't happen.
Got it. So you want to put a bunch of these types of tests or kind of guardrails into the pipelines themselves, as part of the regular sort of engineering path to production.
Yeah.
But there's a whole bunch of servers to kind of herd first, and accounts and access controls and all that. And so unfortunately there's like a big debt there that oftentimes takes priority.
Yeah, which is the same as the rest of tech, right? And the way that tech moves quickly, things either get left behind, or especially in internet companies where people have got a hell of a lot of freedom to build how they want to build and spin up accounts or environments and really do what they feel is necessary. And there's sometimes not the right visibility into those things. So a security team might not even know that an engineering team is doing that. And without seeing it and knowing it's there and building some of those guardrails in, if then mistakes happen, or there's some kind of incident, you're just not going to know it's happened.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people make mistakes in companies in security where they come in and they're trying to do things very quickly, and that's great, and they're trying to fix problems, but they haven't really taken a step back and said, right, what are the fundamentals here? It's visibility, it's getting your logging data in the right place so that you can see things, it's going after what you really care about. So if you've got hundreds of accounts in AWS, you can't deal with those all the time. It's just far too difficult to do. So what do you really care about? Is it your prod environment? Is it your PCI environments? You're more likely to be wanting to focus on those than a QA or dev environment or some kind of testing environment. So it's really just trying to, and again, I don't think that's any different from the rest of security. Understand what would be a real showstopper if something happened, and then go after those first, and then you can start looking at the other things.
Yep. Then back to your sort of risk model, sexy or not, it sort of helps you you prioritize kind of the right things to tackle on an ongoing basis.
I think it does, and I built a sort of a risk model that I'll probably open source at some point. It's nothing overly clever, but we align to CIS benchmarking as well, which is a really cool set of frameworks across the security industry, where at least it gives you an understanding of, if you don't really know what you're doing, which to be fair has probably been my world for quite a while, here's a place to start. Here's some things to go and look at in your environments that are risk rated, and they're things that you should care about, that has been defined as a framework by the industry. Go and look for those. I suppose what's been a real challenge for me moving into cloud security is there aren't a huge amount of companies that seem to be doing it brilliantly well yet. There's a few. There certainly aren't many that talk about it. So it's not as if I can go and watch a talk by somebody who says, here's how I dealt with, building a security team and securing all these things. So it's hard to find ways to get that information. I run a cloud Slack forum where there's some very, very cool people on there, and we do talk about some of those things. But without those mechanisms, I would just be trying things and seeing if it worked, and then sort of experimenting and moving forward. So it's certainly a challenge, because there's just not a huge amount of companies who've really solved that problem yet.
Yeah, indeed. It's a new practice, and like I was talking to one massive enterprise CISO who was just talking about how the adoption of these technologies has moved faster than the maturing of them, maybe.
Absolutely.
And it's a reality, and it's amazing for functionality, and we benefit from the innovation. But some of us are sort of left to slightly sort of pick up the debris that might have sort of stayed a little bit behind.
And this is where security fundamentally is a really fulfilling but difficult role, because we don't just need to know about security. We almost need to know about everything else. And I don't just mean tech. We need to know processes and policies, and we need to know how to speak to teams and how to be embedded at the right levels. There's such a range of things that our roles entail. It's not just pure coding. It's not as if we just sit for 8 hours a day and code things and then go home. But and then multiply that by just how many things you need to care about. So for me, even in a cloud role, which is quite niche, we use the 3 main cloud providers for different things, and we've got to care about all of that, across a huge organization. So that's where that whole risk framework and knowing what to go after it at least gives you some focus and some strategic direction that you wouldn't have had without that.
Yeah, understood. So I guess maybe that's indeed like kind of one last topic. I know you've given some talks and talk about burnout, so amidst this insanity, right? Different teams, lots to track, fast moving technology. Do you have some key advice around how do you do that and sort of stay sane, right? Or don't find yourself, just sort of burning yourself out or sort of, driving to the ground?
Yeah, I actually did a panel a couple of weeks ago at a big event up in Scotland, and we had a number of cyber professionals. We had a professor of psychology from Glasgow Uni. We had a HR rep who had training in mental health first aid, and there was some really interesting content and questions that came from that. And actually, the more that I talk publicly about burnout, the more that I hear people have either had it or are starting to understand that was probably what was going on, not just at senior levels of security, but we deal with such a huge range of things. It's very difficult to not be worried at times that you've missed something or that you've let something slip. We're making calls all the time about what are the right things to do, but by making those calls, you're not doing things as well. And then just that whole risk appetite or attack vector side of security, where it's just everywhere now, with so many more environments to worry about, so many more angles that attackers can look at. And it's just a constant worry, really, of whether we're doing the right thing. And then align that as well with, we're all learning all the time. We're all upskilling all the time. We never really feel like we know enough, or I certainly don't. And that just plays havoc sometimes. And our roles are difficult enough anyway. And sometimes you end up in environments where it's high pressure. I think security is expected to be able to say that they're getting it right all the time and that we're doing the right things, reducing risk, and or just explaining to boards that we're getting it right, and we're getting there, but there's just so much to fix and to do. So I've almost certainly had burnout to a certain degree. Some of it is related to, we all have personal lives. I've had a couple of children in the last 3 years, so you're trying to balance your personal life and family life with what is a very high stress job. I would say a massively enjoyable job. I love it. I wouldn't do anything else these days. It's been the best thing I've ever done, but it comes at a price. And I know my boss Kevin talks quite publicly about some of those things as well. We have numerous mechanisms to deal with it. I'm big on exercise and things, and trying to find time to de-stress as best I can. Family time's hugely important. I've got much better at knowing when to switch off and turn the laptop off and ignore it until the next morning. So there's lots of mechanisms and places to help now for people who feel that they're experiencing some of that. What I would say is, and only speaking from experience, is sometimes when you're in that bubble and you're stressed or you're tired or you're finding it a struggle, is sometimes you don't know how bad that's getting until you've come out the other side, or there's been some kind of catalyst. For me, it was I moved job, to escape some of that, and became a much happier person because of that. And I know that's not always easy to do, to make those kind of changes, but sometimes it's hard to know that it's happening to you until you sort of come out the other side and go, oh yeah, okay, that wasn't so good. I didn't feel so good then. So I'm trying to talk more publicly about it. I know lots of other security people are trying to bring some of these topics to the fore a little bit more, just because I think the more people hear about it, the more they may feel that that's exactly what's happened to them, and they can take things from it.
Yep. It comes down to understanding that it's happening and understanding that's okay, and that you need to do something about it, right? That you can revert it, that it doesn't, it's not some inevitability and you're just not doing your job, but rather you have to maintain it. Otherwise, nobody really benefits if you.
Yeah. And what just to add to that is, it's very hard sometimes in security to prove that what we've done has worked because we don't know what we don't know. And a lot of the times we don't actually know who's attacking us or some of those things that are happening. So when we're trying to articulate, when we've done a piece of work, how successful it's been, it's very hard to do that.
Yep.
Especially to boards or to justify getting more money or more people. So that just all sort of ties into, am I doing the right thing? Is it good enough? Are we reducing the risk that we need to reduce? And then we're always just kind of just waiting for the incident to happen, potentially now in security, hoping that we've done the right thing.
It's definitely a recurring topic that comes up here, which is kind of assessing security, right? Security doesn't have a natural feedback loop. It doesn't hurt until it hurts really bad.
Exactly.
Like your primary means is to know if you've been breached, and even that's not a great means, because like you might have done actually a really excellent job, because like you're never really going to make a breach like impossible to achieve. There's always some constellation. So you have to, I guess, kind of the tips and tricks that have been shared is really all about sort of making an effort to celebrate the successes. Successes might be in achieving SLAs. It might be in completing projects.
Absolutely. I agree totally. And also, I think, not to open up a can of worms here, I think the wider tech press has a responsibility here, because every time there's a hack, it obviously becomes big news, especially if it's big organizations.
Yep.
Now, I can certainly attest to working for an organization that's been hacked recently, and they're as good as I've ever worked for, and certainly from a security point of view, some incredibly talented people doing the best work that they could do. And yet the press obviously tells a story about, hey, a bad thing has happened. And don't get me wrong, that those things can often be poor. But we really, really beat up on companies and teams when that happens.
Yep.
And I'm not sure some of that is particularly fair. They tend to not report on all the good things that have been done because something slipped through the net.
Yeah. So, so this has been great, a lot of great insights, from sort of your learnings and your journey. Before I let you go, I like to ask every guest kind of coming on the show, if you have kind of one bit of advice for a team looking to sort of level up their security, right? It could be a pet peeve that, you're annoyed people repeatedly don't do, or some other sort of a pearl of wisdom, what would that be?
So I guess I'll flip it in terms of what I've done to try and get better or upskill. I follow lots of people on Twitter. I follow lots of people on LinkedIn. I go to lots of conferences and talks and meetups, and I try and put myself out there from a community point of view. And by doing those things, I've met so many great people and I've learned such a huge amount. So there's various mechanisms to upskill in this industry. It's not just about going to training courses or watching online material. For me, it's been about being part of a wider community and learning from all of those people, whether they're super senior security people or people just starting in the industry. There's always something to learn. So anybody within my teams or anyone that I've worked with, I try and encourage people to do that as best they can. It's not for everybody. It's an investment in time. Mm-hmm. Everyone has their personal lives and their family lives, but I certainly invest a huge amount of time in doing those things. So that's what I'd encourage people in the industry to do. Be active, put thoughts out there, put learnings out there if you're brave enough to do it, and your companies will allow you to do it, because that's how we all get a bit better at doing what we're doing.
Excellent. Great advice. Well, thanks Stu for coming on the show. This has been great.
No, thank you.
And thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope you join us for the next one. That's all we have time for today. If you'd like to come on as a guest on this show or get involved in this community, find us at thesecuredeveloper.com or on Twitter @thesecuredev. Visit heavybit.com to find additional episodes, full transcriptions, and other great podcasts. See you next time.